Should it be possible to platinum a new AAA single player only game in just 25 hours? Especially one that has no New Game Plus mode and costs an eye-watering £70. If the answer to that question is yes, then I have got some great news for you about the new Spider-Man 2 game on the PlayStation 5.
He's here.
Lock down the whole building!
I know I can snap him out of this!
We can fight this together!
Headlines aside, let's start with the positives because there are many. Firstly, this is not just a game. It's essentially a playable Spider-Man movie. The storyline is fantastic. It's an emotionally charged roller coaster that explores the complexities of Peter Parker's life as both a superhero and regular person. The character development and relationships between Peter, Miles Morales and other key figures in the Spider-Verse are brilliantly executed. The game includes many of the major bad guys across the franchise, some you fight and some play more of a cameo role. Venom is an absolute beast and is probably the major pull of the game. But don't underestimate Kraven, who I thought was an excellent antagonist and very well done. The game is absolutely beautiful to look at. New York and its surrounding areas are a work of art, and swinging through the city as Spider-Man has never looked or felt so real. It's not just the scenery where Insomniac have upped their visual game, the facial expressions of the main characters are really, really good. Probably the best I've seen in this new generation of games. The game produces a steady level of immersion, helped massively by the lightning fast loading times. It's so incredibly well done that it's easy to forget about it entirely. Just look at this fast travel from one end of New York to the other. It's almost instantaneous. Not that you'll find yourself doing much in the way of fast travelling, because the addition of the wingsuit makes traversing the city much more enjoyable than just being able to swing and jump. You'll also find plenty of wind tunnels throughout the map, which not only give you a boost in speed, they also provide a little bit of directional guidance. In general though, moving around the city is the best it's been across all three games. For the most part, your time in the game is split between playing as Peter Parker and Miles Morales. Switching between the two is smooth, quick, and not as much of a pain as I feared that it would be. There are occasions where both characters fight at the same time, and the combative interaction between both Spider-Men is really nicely done. On the subject of combat, if you've ever played either of the previous Spider-Man games, it won't take more than a minute to get back to grips with how the combat system works and its controls. They are as intuitive as ever. The combat is smooth and varied enough to last the distance of the game, especially as abilities change throughout the campaign story. There are though a few issues with combat, but I'll come back to that in a moment. The game makes tremendous use of the haptics of the PS5 controller. There are a number of missions and tasks throughout the game where careful use of the triggers is required. It's not overdone and it's not difficult. The sound effects that play through the controller are also decent and interact well with the sound from the main game. In terms of side quests and missions, I found them generally more enjoyable than in the previous games. There's a little bit of controversy floating around about this being an overly woke game, but it didn't feel that way to me. I think Insomniac managed to strike a good balance of inclusivity without it feeling like it was being pushed in my face. There was one particular side mission involving Haley, who is deaf, that I thought was particularly well done, especially with relation to in-game sound. There are some nice moments to be had throughout the game, such as the time that you spend at the local fun fair with MJ and Harry. There are plenty of little optional games and rides to try, which reward you with a nice little prize at the end. There are also some fairly emotional moments too. No spoilers here, but if you've already played the game, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to. As with the previous Spider-Man games, there are plenty of challenges spread across the city. Some of them are combat based, where you have to defeat a specified number of enemies within a time limit. Some challenges you have to avoid being hit in, and some have enemies that have to be defeated in a certain way. I particularly enjoyed the Mysterio side missions playing as Miles, especially the opening quest to that chain, which involves Miles doing some Guitar Hero style DJing. There are tons of collectibles to find too, the little spider bugs probably being my favourite of all. They take a little bit of finding, especially at the start, but you do find them quite naturally just playing through and taking your time.
If you weren't a robot, you'd definitely be venomous.
Tech part stashes are also hidden around the city. I'm not quite sure how many there are, but it felt as if there may have been about 10 million of them. It's worth noting that finding them all is not a requirement for the Platinum Trophy, so don't stress too much about getting every single one. So, there are lots of positives about this game, and I want to make it really clear that I thoroughly enjoyed playing it through. But it wasn't quite the polished perfection that I was hoping for. I, like many others, encountered an unacceptably large number of game-breaking bugs. I had at least 5 full game crashes. I experienced a handful of occasions where characters got stuck or blocked, which meant having to close the game and open the last save. But by far the most frustrating bug I came across was the despawning crimes bug. This was something I'd experienced only a couple of times during the campaign, but once that was finished, I'd say that roughly 80% of all crimes were disappearing as soon as I got close to them. It meant that finishing one of the achievements for the Platinum Trophy took over an extra hour when it should really have only taken 5 to 10 minutes. There have been many reports of players where their Spider-Man has turned into a block, which is pretty weird, and some players have fallen through the floor entirely. Don't get me wrong, I realise that modern games are incredibly complex and that there's always going to be a few bugs that go unrealised when the game is released. However, it just seems to me like Spider-Man 2 has had way too many of those, and some of them have been pretty game-breaking. And as fantastic as the campaign was, there was a number of times, particularly around the Venom story towards the end, where things just felt really rushed. I think part of the reason for this is that there are essentially 2 main characters to play. Yes, they interplay, but there are 2 sets of story arcs and twice as much potential for content than the first 2 games offered. However, with all that potential, everything was still crammed into that 25 hours or so of gameplay. The game could have been and should have been much longer. As I mentioned in the positive section a moment ago, the combat is overall very good. However, I really missed some of the old gadgets like the tripline web and the electrical web bomb. There's also no special suit abilities. Yeah, we have this rage mode instead, which is godly, especially when it first unlocks, but it just made the Spider-Man suits feel like skins rather than suits. And I just couldn't find myself really caring for any of them, other than the Bodega cat suit of course, which not only provides a feline finisher, it also just looks awesome. Then we're left with what's available at the end of the game, which is essentially nothing. If you've already completed all the side missions and discovered everything that there is to discover, then thanks to the lack of a new Game Plus mode, there really isn't anything else to do. It's perhaps no surprise that wasn't included in the day 1 release. It wasn't on its predecessors, and it wasn't included with God of War Ragnarok. It's meant to be coming by the end of the year, which isn't too long of a wait, but it means other than replaying the game from scratch on a higher difficulty, there just isn't anything else to do. There's only one thing in the entire game that you can actually replay, and that's the Mysterium challenges as Miles, which aren't exactly rewarding once you've got gold on them all.
All good. Just take it easy.
So that just leaves swinging around the city and fighting crimes, which, as I already mentioned, thanks to that bug, is essentially impossible and extremely frustrating. In conclusion, Spider-Man 2 is a really great game. I enjoyed playing it through, loved the storytelling, loved the visuals, and loved how it all came together in the end. But it's not as good as the original. And it's probably not fair to even compare them, because when the first Spider-Man game was released, it was utterly groundbreaking. There was nothing like it at the time, so everything felt really new. You didn't get that feeling of, oh, it's just more of this again, is it? Which is something that you do feel when you're playing through some of the side missions. There's lots of nice bits of progression from one game to the next and now to this new one, but none of it is revolutionary. Which brings me back to my main two questions. Is Spider-Man 2 really just expensive DLC, and can it win Game of the Year? Well, my answer to both of those questions is no. Yes, it is a premium priced game, and yes, you can complete it in just 25 hours, but those 25 hours are really packed with content. There's an amazing storyline all the way through, some really good boss fights, and like I said at the beginning, this feels like you're playing a Spider-Man movie rather than a game. And movies have endings. The game has left some bits of plot open for future DLC and maybe even Spider-Man 3, and I genuinely am looking forward to playing through the game again when we get our new Game Plus mode. But it's not a contender for Game of the Year. Not when there is competition from the likes of Baldur's Gate 3, which was frankly a masterpiece this year. And with Alan Wake 2 just around the corner, maybe that has a couple of tricks up its sleeve too. Either way, it's a solid 8 out of 10 for Spider-Man 2 as far as I'm concerned, and once these bugs are fixed and we get the new Game Plus mode, it might even push it up to a 9. But it's not a 10, and 10 is what is reserved for Game of the Year. So if you've played it through, what do you think? Is 25 hours enough to platinum a AAA single player only game? Does that represent good value? Did you enjoy the story, the visuals, and all the things that I liked about the game too? Please let me know in the comments section below, and a special thanks to anybody that has commented, liked, or subscribed. It means a lot.